I will introduce myself. I'm Michael Goldberg. I am the one of the professors for this entrepreneurial strategy course, which is an undergraduate class at Case. So a number of the smiling faces here or frowning faces are students in the class. Also, I'm the executive director of the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship. So what we've done is combine guest speakers that were planned to come into our class as part of our speaker series. So we're thrilled, Lanham, to have you today. And for those that have joined before, the format that we use is having students moderate. So Antonio Ianandi, did I pronounce it right?
Yep, you did.
Or close enough.
Yeah.
Who's a junior Case Western Reserve student, and one of our best basketball players, is going to moderate the discussion. So I would encourage you, and I already see, Lanham, your eyes already, there should be some questions found in the chat. So I would encourage all of our community members and folks and students in the class to put questions that you may want to ask to Lanham in the chat. Antonio will sort of call through them. And also, and I already see Mary Kate did it, put your LinkedIn profile. So we're always sort of encouraging folks in the course to build their networks. So please use the chat to do it that way. And I'm going to throw it over to Antonio, who's going to drive this session. And again, Lanham, it's awesome to have you.
No, I appreciate being here with y'all.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Professor Goldberg. And thanks, Lanham, for taking some time to talk with us today. I know we all really appreciate it. So I think first where we'd kind of like to start with everything that's going on right now with the COVID-19 outbreak and kind of what's looming for our economy. I was wondering if you could speak on your experiences at Rackspace, leading through the internet bust and then the financial recession of 2008.
Yeah, what would you like for me to focus the comments on?
Just kind of how leading a company through difficult economic times.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, I've had to go through this twice as a professional. Once as a kid when oil crashed in Texas, and oil is crashing again in Texas. We're down to $19 a barrel. So I, in general, here's how I see all this. Okay, I think it's, in the long run, we'll all be better off for it. It just really hurts in the short term. Okay, so I think for y'all, as you, look to graduate university and head off and launch your careers, I think what were traditional paths will now be a little bit harder. So when you talk about leadership in these times, business leadership or civic leadership, what have you. My perspective is really clusters around a few areas. Number one, I would go ahead and embrace the fact that the world has now changed. And when I talk to people and they're telling me how the world's just going to snap back to normal, I think that's baloney. All right. To me, that's a little Chicken Little stuff that, we're all going to get back, dude. It ain't going to get back. It's going to be hard. Prepare for it to be hard. All right. It doesn't matter whether you look at a stock market index and how long it takes to recover, or if you want to look at individual income levels. It takes years to recover from these things. All right. And what I tell you this time is we're in the middle of something we've never been in before. 100 years ago, we had a Spanish flu pandemic. But everybody who navigated that's no longer here to advise us. Okay. So I think we're in uncharted territory. So my thought number one for you is be prepared for it to be harder than you realize. So it's one of those things in my experience where I feel like, right now I'm working twice as hard and making half the progress. Okay, it will feel that way for a while. All right, I also think, so that's rule one, it's hard. Rule number two is I think we have to be clever. I think this is a time for innovation. And so I'll give you examples of that. What I mean is, as tough as things are, new opportunities will present themselves. All right, so as I think about y'all on this Zoom, you are digital natives. You are seeing the power of digital connection right now during this session. All right, I'm a digital immigrant. Okay, I fake it to be a tech guy. Y'all actually are tech people. Okay, so I think that this type of economic dislocation, I actually think is an advantage for the people on this Zoom conference. I think you understand these tools and techniques and methods better than the average American out there. All right. And so the business opportunities coming out of this for y'all ought to be pretty darn good. Now it's going to be hard to identify. Okay. But it's going to be stuff that's naturally in your wheelhouse. So, my rule number 2 is look for these opportunities and figure out how to do these opportunities in a way that, play to your strengths. Okay. And then my last piece of wisdom for you in managing through these times is, man, be nice. Right? The whole world is in a bad mood and people are anxious and scared. Okay. I talked to an uncle of mine who, he literally retired 6 months ago and has seen a third of his net worth, evaporate. And that's really hard when you retire. I mean, I've never had to experience that. Okay. So I think if you can be nice to folks and be supportive, karma's real. Okay. And things will come back to you in a positive fashion. All right. So number 1, it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's going to be harder than you want to realize. Go ahead and embrace that. Number 2, I think it's to y'all's advantage, right? In many ways because of your digital fluency and your adaptability at your age. So I would look for opportunity. Okay. And then number 3, man, be nice to people, right? Everybody needs a virtual hug or a little pick me up these days.
Yeah, perfect. And I know we appreciate it, because we're going to be looking for jobs soon, and it's nice to have that sort of insight about, how we can show value to some companies. So one of the reoccurring themes in the chat is about Fanatical Support. So I was wondering what really drove you to push Fanatical Support, because that would, like you said in your book, consider you a service company instead of someone wanted you to be strictly tech. So can you kind of talk about your passion for that?
Yeah, it was really the confluence of a couple thoughts, and one thought here is directly applicable to the first question you asked. Look, the opportunity you will find for yourself in these difficult times, it's the same type of conditions that created Fanatical Support. Fanatical Support was born out of the dot-com bust 20 years ago. Okay, and so why did we pick that? Man, because that was the thing nobody else in the world wanted to do, that we thought we could be excellent at and figure out how to make some money with it. So it's the same thing right now. The world's gone through this massive shift as y'all start your careers, thinking about what is it that you can do? What's the point of difference for your talent set, your skill set? What's the strategic point of difference for a company you're trying to join or a company you're trying to start? And how do you make that point of difference, super compelling? So that's where Fanatical Support came from. It was basically, man, what in the world can we do that we can be world-class at? And then the second part was, what can we do that nobody else wants to do? So we viewed, launching Fanatical Support as basically running uphill. Everybody I know, look, okay, I'm middle-aged and chubby. I like to jog downhill. I think running uphill stinks, man. Okay, well, it turns out that's how the rest of the technology world viewed Fanatical Support. What do you mean we have to talk to people? We have to be nice to them? We have to help them when they don't know how to run their stuff? Yeah, dude, that's called Fanatical Support, and it's different. All right, so I think under these current conditions where we're all being forced to innovate and be clever and be creative, understanding what, we are uniquely qualified or positioned to do, and discovering things that the rest of the world doesn't want to do because it's too hard, right? Or it's just not congruent with how they see things. Man, that's where Fanatical Support was born. And then the last part of it that I think is super powerful, it was just an expression of our values. It's one of those things where, man, I am actually on this planet, just for a little while. During this time, I'm trying to make it better. And I like the notion of serving people. I like the notion of, earlier I gave you the tip, just be nice, I like the notion of being nice and trying to help people. And so to have a business strategy that emphasized our core values as an organization, my values as a human, and then was something the rest of the world didn't want to do that was really powerful, that customers valued, that we could be best in the world at, that's where it came from. So I think that was a clever piece of strategy, an innovative piece of positioning. And I feel like those same lessons are certainly applicable in today's nuttiness.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of going off that strategy of doing tech in a different way. I know this comes up a lot in our classes with Cleveland entrepreneurs about, growing a company in Ohio versus, Silicon Valley. So can you kind of speak to some advantages and disadvantage of growing a tech company in San Antonio compared to, San Francisco?
Yeah, I think there are many puts and takes on it. Let's, I have this core value around bad news first. So let's start with the bad news. Okay. The bad news is, in tier two markets, San Antonio being a tier two market, I hang out mainly in Austin. Now I tell you, Austin's a tier two market as well. In tier two markets, the depth of talent is not as great. Just isn't. They're smaller. And so if you need, an amazing developer or an amazing data scientist or something, there are some of them in that area. There just aren't as many as in San Francisco or Manhattan or, something like that. Okay. So to me, that's, bad news number one is just depth. Bad news number two is, sometimes I think particularly here in Austin, Austin's a bit of a lifestyle city. Okay. So it's, kind of like Denver, Colorado is a bit of a lifestyle city. Okay. And what I mean by lifestyle city is, people are choosing a quality of life here. They're coming because the weather's nice and, at 6 o'clock, people head to the lake, that kind of stuff. All right. And so I think, a weakness number two is how to create a high performance world beating culture in the middle of a lifestyle type orientation city. And that's hard because, as a leader, I want to create the conditions under which people can do their best work. They have to volunteer their best effort. I can't mandate great performance out of them. And so, part of that, creating those conditions is, they need to be fully engaged. They need to love what they're doing. They need to enjoy the environment, et cetera. All right. But part of that's also, entrepreneurship is really hard. Point number one earlier on this call is we're going to work twice as hard and make half the progress. Well, that's kind of like startup country anyway. You're trying to figure something out. All right. So those were my negatives. My positives on building a company in a tier two market is, I think if you get it right, it's the best. Because, people, whether it's Cleveland or Austin or, San Antonio, whatever it is, earning people's loyalty there is actually achievable. Whereas I feel like a lot of my friends that try to do stuff in the Bay Area or Manhattan or other places, there's much more of a mercenary type attitude amongst, the employee ranks. So they want to, their idea of working a long time in a company is 4 years. Holy crap, man. Y'all are all about to graduate here in a year or two. It actually goes by pretty fast, right? It takes a while when you're there in the middle, but when you're done, it goes by pretty fast. Well, it's the same way working in a company. In order for a company to get strong, man, it takes a lot more than 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And so I think the big advantage to building a company in Cleveland would be if you perceive that there's competitive advantage in having a loyal employee base. I actually think in these tier two markets, you can have loyal employee bases. Okay, that's number one. And then number two, with that loyalty, I think you can create the conditions under which people will volunteer their best effort. So you'll have a loyal base and they will give you their A efforts. And I think that if you can get that stuff right, there's a little bit of a virtuous cycle or a reinforcing loop to where the culture will get really thick and it'll get heavy and it will, become viral and you'll get, increasing rates of return on people providing discretionary effort. Because I really think there's magic inside of human beings with discretionary effort. For whatever reason, I think it's, that final 2% that you do, that's the difference between you getting a question exactly right versus pretty much right. And I kind of feel it's the same way in business. It's that little extra effort can sometimes yield asymmetric outcomes. So creating a culture where people want to volunteer that extra effort, I think really matters. And in my experience, it's been easier for me, I think on a relative basis to do that in tier two markets than it would be in Manhattan or San Francisco. And one easy way I think about it is, look, as you're already experiencing, I'm not that cool. Okay, so for me to be able to create a really cool place for people to work is a hell of a lot easier in San Antonio than it is in San Francisco. Because in San Francisco, I have to go compete with Zoom and Facebook and all these other mega cool people. Now, whether they're really cool or not, I don't know. They may just have really good PR agents. I just know that in these tier 2 markets, I have a better chance of pulling it off. All right. And I think there's a lot of joy in that because I think it's just more uplifting. It's a special opportunity for people in those communities, and we can create a very loyal, engaged base.
Definitely. Kind of going off the fact of, having dedicated employees being so important. We have a question from a student in the class, from Marissa Muth, who is a senior accounting and finance major from Pittsburgh. And she says, in your book, you mentioned the importance of dedicated and loyal employees. When you're starting a company and have limited resources, how do you attract talent?
Okay. So first of all, Marissa, I'm sorry about your senior spring. I think once we're through this, y'all should have senior summer or something. I don't know. I'm really sorry. I think, I had so much fun senior spring and the copious amounts of beverages I consumed. So I'm sorry about that. Okay. So I think with respect to starting a company and creating a loyal workforce, the thing about it is I actually think limited resources are a good thing on this. Okay. Here's why. If you rank, motivation factors for humans, I would call compensation and money hygiene, and that's it. I don't think that if I paid you to get A's in school, I don't think that's as powerful as you actually having an intrinsic motivator to drive you to get A's. Okay, so I think the thing about leadership to do here, particularly when resources are constrained, is to get really clear about what's an intrinsic motivator versus an extrinsic motivator. An extrinsic motivator is, I'll pay you $10. Well, this is probably not a market rate, $100 for an A. Okay. Whatever it is. An intrinsic motivator is you have an innate sense of drive and fulfillment around success and achievement. Okay. So I think when you're starting a company and you're trying to create an engaged, loyal workforce, I don't think you can buy engagement or buy loyalty. Every time in my past when somebody gives me a raise, I'm happy for about 3 weeks. And then I'm starting thinking to myself, man, I've been working my ass off I've been working really hard for 4 weeks. So, what have you done for me lately? Okay. So I think the trick is to discover as a leader how to tap into people's intrinsic motivators. The point's just, I think compensation in general doesn't lead to the loyalty and engagement for people to do their best work. I think compensation is a hygiene factor. So to me, the way to get the best work is to create, the environment where people actually, they wake up in the morning, they want to get there. And they get to work with people they care about, and they have the tools they need to do a great job. They're part of an organization who they believe that organization's doing great stuff and is looking after folks. And so I kind of feel like as leaders, if we can get that type of thinking into our companies, you'll get all the loyalty and performance you need, and it won't be a money thing. I think you'll be able to pull it off. Just it's a little bit of the platinum rule, treat people as they want to be treated. And I truly believe, man, most people, despite the Zoom bomb we just experienced, people are good. They're showing up to work. So they want to take care of their families. They want to build a future. They want to do the right thing for customers. And as leaders, if we just do our part to help that come true, man, I think people will do great work with us.
Yeah, no, definitely. Kind of going off that, we have another question from Mitch Webb, a management senior. He says, you've talked about how as much as you've enjoyed your relationships with many of your Rackspace employees, having to let people go became very difficult. If you could go back and would you work more on not having as many relationships?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I don't know. I think, we're all different. Okay. For me, look, I truly believe as humans, we're all connected. We're seeing that play out with this, COVID-19 thing. And, I'm just trying to do my best to help people along the path, right? Myself included. So anytime I fired somebody, it hurts. Now I would rationalize it and say, look, I'm helping them find their long-term place, blah, blah, blah. But, it still hurts, dude. It's always going to hurt is kind of my point of view. And if it doesn't hurt, I feel like I'm no longer alive. All right. So in the day for me, I still think it's worth risking, right? I think for me to be an effective leader at my best, I need to work closely with people and I care about them. And there's no faking that. That just kind of is what it is. And as a consequence, when I terminate people's employment, it hurts. And look, right now across our portfolio, we got a lot of that going on. I think all but one company I'm invested in is currently doing layoffs as a result of this virus. It totally sucks, and there's really, we're doing our best to be generous with people to help them land on their feet. But the reality is I don't have a lot of great ideas about where they can go next under these conditions to find an amazing work opportunity. So I think for all of us, we're connected and it's always going to hurt. And I just think we have to do the best we can to help people land on their feet. And it's a little bit where I've always kind of thought you can judge a company's culture based on its generosity with people who depart. It's easy to be good to people during the good times. When we're making a lot of money, woohoo, let's have a masseuse and a chef and we'll eat sushi for lunch every day, all that stuff, right? It's to me, the real character is revealed with generosity in difficult times. And that's where we are now.
Kind of moving forward, there were various questions in the chat from David, Anmal, Abby, and Anthony, kind of around the basic idea of, your partnership with Lou and Graham and how at first, it was really, really good and things went really well. And then kind of as it went on, how things kind of broke down. So could you kind of speak on, how you operate, your relationships with partners and, coworkers and employees?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is, I think, one thing I tell you is all this stuff is dynamic. Okay. So what I mean is, look, in y'all's life, you probably have really good friends from elementary school that you're not nearly as close to now, even though it's only 8 years later. I think this is part of what happens, with relationships in general. Relationships are dynamic. I mean, my marriage, today's show, we just celebrated our 26th anniversary. It's either getting stronger or weaker. There's no in between. Okay. There's no neutral. If you tell yourself it's neutral, you're really going backwards. Okay. So I think it's the same way with business partnerships. It's the same way with friendships. And the reality is we're all bouncing around in the wind a little bit, man. It's just kind of how life goes. And so I think Lou and Graham and I, for a period of time, that was complete magic. And the three of us in those circumstances were able to do what was probably up to that point in our lives our absolute best work. And for whatever reason, all those things aligned and we were able to do it. And then when things started to break down, we were not able to recover that magic. And I think you see that in lots of places. You see that in athletics. You see that in the music industry. Bands break up. Stuff happens. Okay, so I just think this is what I've come to realize, now that I'm a little bit older, is I just kind of think that's part of the human condition, man. I just think, look, we got good friends from high school that I only see once a year now. But when we were 17 years old, we were inseparable. Okay, and I've had the same experience in business. So what I conclude from it now is, there are going to be these dynamic patterns in life. There's seasons in life, and we should really treasure each one of those seasons, man. Doesn't make it right or wrong or good or bad. But when you're in it, these are truly special times. This is why I'm sorry the seniors lost their senior spring. That's a special season, man. And somehow you got to recapture that this summer or however y'all decide to do it. So my take on it is, for me and Lou and Graham, we were trying to do our best stuff. It worked for a long time, then started to break down, and we just weren't able to recover it. And that's all it is. Doesn't make me a good guy or a bad guy. That's just how it played out. All right. And I got a lot of, gratitude for the experience we had. And it's funny, both those guys texted me yesterday, want to make sure I didn't have COVID-19, so I'd also say, time heals. and relationships heal, you know. So that's my take on it.
Yeah. So another question that was kind of brought up in the chat from Atirola and Igor is, when you're in a startup, how do you know when it's time to keep working and pushing harder versus when it's time to, you know, give up and move to something different?
Okay, that's a good one. All right, so in general, no, I have a few cognitive biases on this, and I'm a huge Winston Churchill fan. So, man, I don't ever want to quit. Okay, so as far as having a great diagnostics around when to quit, I am not the right person to advise you on that. I'm terrible at quitting. Always have been. You know, just I struggle with it. Okay, so I got a few ideas about persisting, though. All right, so I generally think, you know, life, most of my successes and achievements in life have followed a J curve. And sometimes it's a repeating J curve. So what I mean by that is, you know, it will basically, I'll go through a dip and then start to pull out of it. So right now I would tell you our world's in a J curve, right? We are going down. We haven't hit bottom yet, and we haven't started the recovery yet from an economic point of view. All right. You know, that has been the story of my life with almost every achievement I've had. And so the question becomes, well, how do I know I'm going down and I'm going to pull it out for an achievement, or I'm just going to keep going down and have a failure? So I've had plenty of failures too. Okay. So the only hack I offer about having a good diagnostic is, in general, when it gets really hard, I try to give myself at least 3 or 4 more at bats in that really difficult time before I even start to think about quitting. And in order to make a decision about, man, I'm just going to write this investment off, or I'm not going to keep hanging in there, I end up relying on the counsel of others around me that I hope can be more objective. Okay, because I find, you know, my own weakness is, look, you know, I love business. I'm hyperactive. I got an ego. I think I can kind of do anything. All right, so that's a dangerous guy to figure out when he can quit. So I need to rely on the expert counsel of others that aren't so close, that aren't seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, you know, in order to know when I should objectively think about abandoning something, or objectively think about writing something off. When you're in the middle of the journey, man, is it a journey worth completing or not? You know, I generally think that, you know, so much success comes through persistence and grit that I am biased against abandonment. But abandonment is sometimes the right move, which is why I need objective parties to slap me around a little bit and help me think about it.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of going off that, like, you know, you being a passionate guy and having that goal to ultimately create jobs in Texas. This question is from Sam Hansen, a senior biology major. And he asked, was there ever a time where you lost sight of your initial goal to create jobs? And how did you balance this desire with demands of being president, CFO, and CEO of Rackspace?
Yeah, there were plenty of times. Okay, so I think that, you know, my desire, you know, continued desire around creating jobs, you know, that's one of those intrinsic motivators that we talked about earlier. Okay. But to the point here, to the question rather, there were certainly times when, you know, short-term things would freak me out or overwhelm that desire. You know, there's no doubt about it. And look, I think, you know, we're human. And so at least for me, you know, there were periods of great stress where, man, I was more focused on that stress than I was creating jobs. All right. Just how it goes. All right. So I kind of think about, look, you guys are all big brain university folks. So if you take a line, you know, that's up and to the right, I generally think, you know, my life is kind of like a sine wave going around that line. Okay. So there are times where, man, I'm tracking real nicely. So other times where I'm falling below, and there's other times where I'm riding above, you know, and so I just think it's, how do I stay true to that in a way that's sustainable, that I can keep going? And in the parts where my behavior was incongruent with those goals, where I dipped below that trend line, short-term acute stress that was going on in my life, may have been going on in the company, may have been going on in my personal life, may have been something with my family, you know, whatever it is. the only good news in all that is, but for, a couple of really bad pockets. I mean, we were basically a job creator every month. And so it's nice just in terms of managing one's own psyche that if you can have a long-term goal around creating jobs and add jobs every month, it's kind of like you get this little reinforcing loop that makes life pretty darn happy.
Definitely. And I know one thing you guys did at Rackspace was, you took old retail space at the mall and created your office. And that could be something we might see, in the future with this coronavirus outbreak, if teams can get around that office space cost. So we have a question from Max Pennington, a sophomore chemical engineer. And he was wondering if you envision allowing anyone who has the ability to work from home at Rackspace to continue to do so after the crisis. And also, is this a trend you could see happening throughout the U.S. after?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so a couple thoughts here. So one thing about malls, I think we were starting to have a retail apocalypse before this virus, and the virus has accelerated it. So it may be a really good time to repurpose physical structures like malls, for office space or something. So that may be an entrepreneurial opportunity for y'all coming out of this. Okay, that's just one quick thought. So the second thought, here's where I get confused. All right, I think in my experience, it was helpful for me to be able to see people and literally touch people on a daily basis from a cultural point of view, whether it was a handshake or whatever. Just to be able to see people and interact with them in person, I thought was additive to a corporate culture. Okay, I just, maybe it's not for everybody, okay, but I do think humans, we're used to living in tribes or whatever. I think we're not really, most of us, I don't think, are solitary critters. So I think being physically present, at least for some chunk of our work life, I think really helps us, feel like we're part of a team, feel like we're part of a movement. So I do think for me as a leader, I think it's easier to lead and create great performance if people are in the same building and you can see them. Okay. Now I think coming through this crisis, there may be a bigger push for remote working. I think that's been more of a trend anyway. So I'm 49. I would say probably a good third of the companies I meet that are led by people under the age of 35 have a disproportionate chunk of their workforce remote in a way that I never would have done. Okay, so I just think that, look, these people grew up in a different world. They're used to interacting this way. So for them, it's normal. For them, it's natural. Okay, so I think that with this virus pressure, you may see, I would predict, because y'all are the next generation of business leaders, and this is how you're growing up doing it. Okay, so my prediction would be there will be a higher proportion of an employee base working remotely. That the notion of this massive corporate headquarters where a whole company works, that's going to feel pressure. Okay, so I think that we should repurpose malls for joint co-working office space. Okay, maybe you can create a little economic cluster inside those things with multiple companies. And I think you'll see more remote workers. I think as leaders, it makes it more challenging.
And now in your book, you talked about, how this physical space of an office represents culture. Is that something you've carried over to Build Group?
Yeah, it is. So, I do think physical surroundings either amplify or inhibit, how people work together. Okay, so, the classic corner office for the fancy CEO or like the palatial professor office at y'all's university, these kind of things are interesting to me. Okay, so I've always tried to knock those barriers down. And I think there's trade-offs, right? So the one thing is, let's have an office without a bunch of walls to increase communication. But, it turns out for me to do some of my best thinking, I need a quiet environment. So I need a few, sanctuaries of quiet in order to really think deeply. Okay, so the things we do in Build Group, we try to create a balance. I still sit at an open desk. I don't have an office, but we have plenty of conference rooms where people can go, hide away and, if they need to do a little coding or whatever it is, they can do that in a quiet environment. So we try to get a mix, and I don't really know the right answer on that. I think for us, it depends on the individual. I really think it comes down to if you want to sit in the middle, if you like to work in diners with noise reduction headphones, man, I think, my environment's perfect. If you like to work in libraries where you don't hear a snap, crackle, pop all day, my environment's not the greatest for you. So I just think we have to tailor it to people's individual needs.
Yeah, definitely. Moving forward with Build Group, we have a question from Rosalind Yang, a third-year computer science major. With Build Group, you focus on companies who have the grit to play the long game and can endure for decades. How can you tell if a company fits that? And what are some qualities you look for when choosing a company to invest in?
Okay, yeah, good question. So here's there are a few little secret filters. Okay, so we have our internal data science effort I call Solomon, just because I like Proverbs. Okay, and what it's about is it's just a gigantic filter that is scraping corporate data to try to generate predictive analytics around companies that we think have the grit to persist. Okay, so what do we think's really in there? All right, there's some fundamental economic elements that are all things you already know. So the microeconomics of a company that can persist really comes down to customer loyalty, unit economics, and employee engagement. Okay, it's really that. So now there's lots of little metrics we can get into in there, but that's not all that insightful. It's like, yeah, dude, if you don't have a real business, you don't have a chance for persisting. Okay, that's the microeconomics punchline. On the macro piece of it, it really comes down most to a couple things. Number one, who are the other owners of the company? Okay, and number two, what is the long-term orientation of the senior team and founders? Because what really happens, I think, in a lot of these companies, if you look at the private capital markets, for the most part, I think the private capital markets are becoming, more and more short-term. Okay, whereas, we complain about public markets, everybody's on a 90-day reporting cycle. The stock market doesn't think long enough, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and all that I believe is true. I think private markets have some elements of that as well now. I think the capital markets are getting super specialized, whether you can do revenue financing or venture debt or, venture capital firms tend to look for just a few years. Private equity firms then show up after the venture capital firm. You end up stacking these 3 to 5 year investors on top of each other, okay, in order to keep going. And so when you look at a company's ability to persist, for a decade or 2 decades, a lot of it comes down to who owns the company and how long do they want to play. Okay, what I would tell you is if you are a private company today, majority owned and controlled by a private equity firm, it is unlikely, in my view, that you will get to build that company for 15 years. The only way you're going to get to build it for 15 years is if you go public, because that majority owner is going to sell that to somebody else, and that somebody else is probably a larger company that's going to consume you. Okay, so my view is if you want to go and persist, you need to have a core nucleus of ownership that actually wants to go build for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And then the next layer of that is you need to have a leadership team that's oriented that way. Okay, because most people I talk to, they're just not. I don't know how many of y'all, here, I'll give you a little question, okay? Would you rather work the next 5 years and make $5 million or the next 10 years and make $15 million? Right? Turns out deferred gratification is a tricky thing. It's a hard thing. And really what we're asking companies to do to persist is we're asking them to have some deferred gratification. Right? It's how can you, and I think for all of y'all, look, you're all taxpayers. Here's a dirty little secret that nobody wants to tell you in the investing world. You are better off compounding at a slower rate and holding it longer than you are selling things and bearing reinvestment risk in the short term. So all that means is when you start your company, if you've already built it 7 years, and let's just say your growth has slowed from 30% to 20%, I would tell you you're better off growing at 20% a couple more years, understanding everything you do about that business and then selling it 2 years from now than you are selling it today and bearing reinvestment risk to go figure out something else to do. Okay, once you have a good one, man, I would just keep mining that gold. And you're better off growing because you're going to have to pay taxes, all sorts of stuff. So my orientation, my view of it in terms of a wealth maximizing strategy is as an investor, owner, entrepreneur, we are better off owning it longer, even if we're growing slower, because I know how to manage those risks versus selling out a couple of years early and trying to find something else that's cool to do.
Yeah, kind of going off that public versus private capital markets. We had an entrepreneur come and talk to us in the beginning of the semester, Sam Gervais, who said, taking a company public is like putting handcuffs on an entrepreneur. So I was wondering if you could talk about being CEO of Rackspace before you guys went public and then after you went public and kind of the advantages and then disadvantages of that.
Yeah, look, it's a good controversial topic. Look, I think from a, let's just get the bad facts news out of the way first. From an ego point of view, it was great, dude. Look, let's just be honest. Who doesn't want to go to the New York Stock Exchange and ring the bell? Anybody? Everybody wants to do that. It was killer. I had a ball, man. Okay, and you get to walk around and be public market guy and blah, blah, blah. So that's fantastic. All right. Now, with that does come some downsides. Now, end of the day, we went public primarily because we had, big investors that wanted money. Our VCs wanted their money. And so it was either we were going to go public or we were going to have to sell the company. We wanted to keep going, so we went public, okay? And in the process, got to scratch our ego need, all right? So that's all the good news. The other good news about it is, for whatever reason, when you're a public company, people are more likely to do business with you. And I think that's entirely silly. Just turns out it's true. Once we were public, our ability to sell into enterprise customers went up dramatically. And it's like a little club. You're a public company. I'm a public company. Okay, we can do business with each other. And I kind of didn't believe that until I went through it, but it's true. For conservative enterprise companies, they feel better doing business with other public companies for whatever reason. Okay, so that's all the good news. The bad news is, there's an investor class in our country. Okay. And, once you're publicly traded, that investor class, they think they're in charge, and every 90 days, you're going to have to tell them what's going on. As much as everybody says they don't look at the stock price every day, everybody looks at the stock price every day. Okay. So you end up injecting these external factors into the company that, the previous quote about putting handcuffs on an entrepreneur, I do think those external factors can serve as handcuffs. It's really a rare person can say, look, I don't care what the public market thinks. I'm going to run this like we want to run it, blah, blah, blah. And look, we did that and got away with it for a few years. We went public. We didn't provide guidance, all that stuff. But, then what happens is in tough economic times, investors need some sense of comfort. And the way you provide comfort as a C-level executive of a public company is to provide them guidance, which basically means, hey, you get paid the big bucks to predict the future. And if you can't predict the future, you don't get paid the big bucks. But if you do, you do. And so that ends up being this game that happens. So I just think, to me, what happened, the handcuffs show up in the form of these external factors. And these external factors have opinions about what you ought to be doing. And whether it is investing in new products or, cutting expenses to drive profit, whatever it is, those external folks have an opinion. And their opinion's going to have to be factored into the company's plans going forward, one way or the other, right? So you can choose to ignore their opinions and deal with that, or you can incorporate part of their opinions and, address it that way. So I think that's the thing, is you just end up with these other constituents that are quite opinionated.
Yeah. Kind of going off of that, a few students in the chat have asked about, Eric and Travis have asked, how are you able to balance your work and family life balance? and what did you kind of have to do to make all that work?
Okay. So, I full disclosure, I don't have many regrets. I do regret missing some important things with my children during those years. Okay. Full disclosure. Those are literally like some of the only regrets I have in my life. So the question about balance, I don't have a secret sauce for you on that. Okay. My perspective is the following. Where I got more at peace with it was not when I was goal seeking for balance, but when I decided to take a more integrated approach. So let me give you an example. So, as an entrepreneur guy, trying to build a business across different continents and stuff, I would have to travel regularly. Well, I just started taking my family with me. Okay. So when I would go open an office in Amsterdam or the UK or whatever, I'd take my family with me. I'd pull the kids out of school for a week to do it. And I'd basically say, look, this is an opportunity for you to see a different part of the world, to expand your horizons and perspective. Okay. And so it wasn't about, I was in balance. It was more like I was trying to integrate all this stuff together. And then ultimately, so I started doing that first. Then the next thing I tried to figure out how to do, which is a really difficult thing. To me, it's the concept of being fully present. Okay, so what I mean by fully present is, when you're hanging out with your friends, at a bar or whatever, sometimes you're fully present and completely engrossed in the moment. And other times you're thinking about, holy crap, I got to leave in 20 minutes because I got to go write a paper. Okay. And what I would say is when you're thinking about how you got to leave to go write that paper, you're no longer fully present. Okay. So as an entrepreneur, for a lot of years, even if I was sitting in front of my family, in the back of my head, I was thinking, okay, 20 more minutes. I got to go do some email. I got this problem with this customer. I got this problem with the CFO, whatever it is. There are always other conversations in my head. Okay. So what I would encourage you to think about as you start your career as an entrepreneurial journey is how to master the capability to be fully present at certain times in your life. Okay. So if you're sitting there with your spouse or your best friend or your kids or whatever it is, if you can be fully present in those moments, I would tell you you're alive and you're doing your part. If instead what you got is alarm bells going off in the back of your head, you're going to have regrets later that you weren't fully present. All right. So for me, the balance thing is to make, what sometimes are really difficult decisions around, I've only got so many hours in a day. How am I going to allocate those hours? Because I got to spend some time every day looking after me, whether it's going for a run or, eating a piece of broccoli or whatever it is. Okay. I got to spend another part of the day looking after my loved ones. I got to spend another part of the day looking after my career so I can feed those loved ones and help people. And figuring out how to integrate those things or be fully present during them is my answer to the balance question. And I think look, I'm an economics nerd, so I'm just trying to get to the efficient frontier. And what are the marginal trades to optimize along that frontier between my family, my loved ones, my career, my friends, my business?
Perfect. So we're getting close to 2:00 here, so we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions. If anyone has any last minute things they're wondering about, throw them in the chat. So talking about this idea of fully present, that's something that, you were very keen on when you were trying to get the company to become profitable again in the early 2000s with Project Profit. How do you balance, because you talk about the thing from City Slickers, focus on one thing. How do you balance that in your build group where you potentially have, multiple investments at the same time and you have different things going on?
Yeah. So, back to that efficient frontier, sometimes it's just about triage. And so right now, I think the world's in a triage moment. Okay. So one of my favorite books of all time is by, Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he's got a 2x2 matrix in there about the important and urgent. So what triage means is you're dealing with things that are important and urgent. So in Build Group right now, what's important and urgent? Man, we've invested 30% of our capital. And for those companies in which we've invested, we got to make sure they make it through this dip, through this J curve. That's important and urgent. What's important and not urgent? Well, we got 70% of the capital left, and there ought to be some amazing investment opportunities coming out of this dip, right? But it's not as time sensitive as making sure the ones we have make it through the next 3 months or however long this dip persists. Okay, so the way I think about this efficient frontiers, I'm trying to triage the things that are critical and urgent. The risk with that is, in my experience, the places where I've had the most success, look, it's good to rise to the occasion, okay, of things that are mission critical and urgent, but I'll often find the best opportunities are in those things that are not urgent but important. And that's how you can truly make a bunch of money, right? The whole world works on trying to put out fires, right? That's the important and urgent stuff. The real growth things, I think, are the important things that aren't so urgent. So I try to spend a good chunk of my day on things like that, whether it is, cultivating relationships with entrepreneurs, whether it is giving I'm a nerd. I read academic journals a bunch about business models and things. Okay. So I view that as an investment in intellectual property for myself. Okay. So investment areas tend to be important and not urgent. Firefighting areas tend to be urgent and important. I try to allocate as much time as possible to those investment areas.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Kind of wrapping things up, so we can kind of end on like an uplifting note. We have a question from Ariel McHorter, and she is a senior majoring in nutritional biochemistry and metabolism.
Oh, cool.
And her question is, what was the most rewarding part of your experience at Rackspace?
For me, it's I'd summarize real simply. I got to work with people I absolutely loved. I got to help them, achieve their dreams, in some instances beyond their dreams. And I got to do it in a business where we served other businesses and made them more capable. So just the notion of, to me, that's a really virtuous thing to be able to say. I got to work with people I love to work with. Man, what a treat, what a gift that is. And then I got to work on technology that was really cool, right? And I got to help people, achieve their potential and achieve their dreams. And then we got to spread that and share that capability with, millions of companies around the world. That's a heck of a way to go through life, dude, right? If you can if we can all put ourselves in a position to where we can develop our strengths and our capabilities, volunteer them with people we want to be with in a way that helps people achieve things and helps companies grow and create more jobs. That for me, that's a little slice of heaven, now everybody's slice is defined differently, like I got a real good friend of mine who's a psychiatrist. And, and so what he tells me is, look, Lanham, I save humans one at a time. And that's actually a really cool way to think about psychiatry. I never thought of it that way before until he told me. Okay, whereas I think about, for me, it's about, look, how can I manufacture, how can I be part of a system that creates jobs for people to, take care of their families and all that stuff. So for me, it's different. For my friend Chris, it's about one at a time. For y'all, it will be different. I just encourage you to think about, for you, if you're going to dream that crazy, fulfilling, impactful, joyous life for yourself, I would encourage you to pursue that with vigor and be analytical about where your talents reside and how to position yourself to use those every day in a way that helps folks and helps you. If you can get those things to align, man, you're going to be one happy little bugger.
All right. Well, Lanham, thank you very much for your time and talking for us today. I know we all really enjoyed it. I'm going to throw it over to Professor Goldberg, who'll close up with some ending comments.
Lanham, thank you so much for sharing. I will do a quick plug, and it leads into our speaker for next week. So Becca Braun was Lanham's partner in crime in the Billionaire Bust book, which we used in the class, and it really is a quick and light and fun read. And Becca is a local entrepreneur creating educational content based in Cleveland. And I always promo, you're not even our next speaker. We do have a speaker tomorrow, John Knifick, who's a Case alum, who is one of the co-founders of Wiser, and he'll be on at 1 o'clock. And then Becca will be here on Thursday at 1 o'clock talking about Braun Inc., which is a company she started here. And before joining Braun Inc., she was one of the original founders of Jumpstart, and so she knows our ecosystem well. So it'll be interesting getting her perspective on growing and starting an educational materials company in a very quickly changing world, and she'll probably also have some good perspectives about ecosystem as well. So Becca, thanks for your partnership on the course and Billionaire Bust, and working with Lanham on this. And we will hopefully, and for the community members again, thank you for joining, and check out our events page, but we'll be back Wednesday, Thursday, both at 1 o'clock, and then noon on Friday. We have a session that's part of my Beyond Silicon Valley MOOC, looking at the role of government in supporting entrepreneurship in the crisis. So with that, thanks everybody. Thanks again, Lanham.
Yep.
And
thank you all.
we're connecting with everybody soon.